He was the man everyone trusted, the man who fixed things that others gave up on. Engines. Friendships. Hearts. In a small auto shop at the edge of town, Malcolm Carter built his piece one repair at a time. His hands were steady, his word was gold, and his heart was loyal to the wrong person. But what happens when the man who fixes everything faces the one thing he can't repair? A marriage built on love, cracked by pride and broken by betrayal. When whispers turn into lies and love turns into a test of faith, the quiet man becomes a storm. This is not just a story about heartbreak. It's about dignity. It's about what happens when truth stands alone and still wins. Because sometimes God doesn't save the relationship. He saves you from it. Before we begin, where are you watching from tonight? And have you ever forgiven someone who didn't deserve it? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Your story might just help someone else find their peace. The smell of motor oil and steel filled the air, thick and familiar. It was the scent of work, of honest labor, of a man who believed in fixing things, not just cars but the small, breakable parts of life. Malcolm Carter's garage sat on the corner of Willow and 9th, not much to look at from the outside, but inside it breathed with rhythm. The soft hum of engines, the clank of wrenches, the hiss of air compressors, they were his music. His hands moved with practiced grace, steady as clockwork, skin roughened from years of turning bolts and holding heavy truths. He didn't talk much. Never had. Around town, people said you could tell everything about Malcolm Carter without hearing a word from him. His eyes told stories of discipline, loss, resilience. He'd been through his share of storms, though no one quite knew how many. But what people respected was his steadiness. He showed up. Every day. Rain or shine. "Malcolm, you ever take a day off?" his apprentice, young Terrell, would tease. Malcolm would just smile faintly, wiping sweat from his brow. "Engines don't fix themselves, son. And life don't wait on nobody." He lived by rules unspoken. Do your job right the first time. Keep your word. Mind your peace. And if you give a handshake, make sure it means something. In a world that shouted, Malcolm whispered, and somehow that quiet voice carried further. Every morning before the city woke, he'd stand by the open bay door, sipping black coffee from a chipped mug. The sunrise always hit the same way, soft orange spilling across old metal, dust swirling in gold patterns. He'd watch the world wake up, nod to the bus driver that passed by, and whisper a silent thank you for another day. But peace, even in its purest form, can feel like a cage when you've lived in it too long. Malcolm's life was predictable, maybe too predictable. Same breakfast, same commute, same tools lined up like old soldiers on his workbench. Some men crave noise and adventure. Malcolm found comfort in repetition. Yet, deep inside, a quiet ache lived. Not for chaos, but for connection. He went home to an empty house every night. The photos on his mantle hadn't changed in years. His late parents, a younger version of himself holding a trophy from a neighborhood boxing league, a picture of his shop when it first opened. That was his life. Framed memories of things that used to matter. Sometimes, when he sat at the small kitchen table, he'd hear the clock tick and realize how loud time could be when there's no one else to drown it out. He had loved once years back. But that story ended before it really began. People said she left because she couldn't handle the quiet. Malcolm never corrected them. Maybe they were right. Maybe the world had gotten too loud for men like him. Still, every day he showed up. Fixed engines. Helped old ladies start their cars. Gave free tune-ups to single mothers who couldn't afford repairs. Never asked for thanks. Never expected it. Then came the rain. A hard, unrelenting storm that made the day feel darker than evening. Malcolm was closing up when headlights cut through the downpour. A sleek black sedan pulling into the shop, tires hissing on wet pavement. The door swung open and she stepped out. Tall, elegant, mid-30s maybe. A woman who looked like she didn't belong anywhere near grease or grit. Her heels clicked on the wet concrete, coat clutched tight, phone pressed to her ear. Her voice carried authority, sharp, confident. "I told you to send the files before the call, not during." She caught sight of Malcolm and paused, irritation softening just slightly. "Hi, you still open?" she asked, lowering the phone. Malcolm nodded. "Depends on what's broken." "Everything," she sighed. "My car, my patience, maybe even my luck." Something in her tone made him smile. Not mockery, recognition. He'd heard that kind of exhaustion before. The kind that came from giving everything to a world that never gave enough back. "Pop the hood," he said simply. She hesitated, clearly out of her element, then did as told. Malcolm worked in silence, diagnosing the issue with a flashlight and a hum. The rain drummed a rhythm on the roof. She watched him, calm, steady, almost poetic in the way he handled the tools. "So, you don't talk much, do you?" she asked. He gave a small smile. "Talking don't fix cars." That made her laugh. A real one this time. "Fair enough." When he finished, he wiped his hands, started the engine, and stepped back as it purred to life. "Loose belt. Easy fix. You're good to go." She blinked. "That's it." He nodded. "That's it." She reached for her purse, but he waved her off. "Rain's heavy. Pay tomorrow. Just drive safe tonight." She looked at him, really looked. Something in his eyes, that unshakable calm, caught her off guard. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Not just for the fix." He just nodded again, returning to his work. But when she drove off into the night, a strange silence filled the shop. One that wasn't lonely, just different. Malcolm didn't know it yet, but the woman in the rain had just altered the rhythm of his world. And maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of the one thing he couldn't fix, his own heart. "Tell me, where are you watching from tonight?" Have you ever known a man like Malcolm? Quiet, loyal, the kind who fixes everything around him but no one ever notices what's breaking inside him? Drop a comment below if his story already reminds you of someone. The storm hadn't let up. It rolled across the city like something alive, sheets of rain washing the streets, thunder grumbling in the distance. Most garages had closed early, but Malcolm Carter stayed. He always stayed. There was a kind of peace in the storm. It kept people indoors and left him alone with the hum of his tools. He was tightening a bolt on an old Buick when the sound came, tires slicing through puddles, a luxury engine coughing under distress. He looked up just in time to see a black sedan swing into his lot, headlights cutting through the downpour. The wipers beat furiously, but the car still shuddered like a living thing in pain. The door flung open and she stepped out, Lena Brooks. She wasn't like anyone who usually pulled into Malcolm's shop. Everything about her screamed precision and control. Her coat was tailored, her hair slicked back even in the rain, her expression sharp enough to cut glass. One glance and Malcolm could tell, this was a woman used to commanding rooms, not asking for help. She slammed the door, muttering into her phone. "No, Marcus, listen. If the files aren't ready by 9, we lose the client. I don't care if you're at dinner. Fix it." Her heels clicked through puddles, her frustration louder than the thunder. When she finally looked up and saw Malcolm watching her, she sighed, part embarrassment, part exhaustion. "Tell me you can fix this," she said, holding out her keys like an ultimatum. Malcolm wiped his hands on a rag. "Depends. What's wrong with it?" She exhaled, gesturing helplessly at the car. "It keeps stalling. I just had it serviced last week. Some tech guy said it might be the alternator. Or maybe the universe. I don't know anymore." Malcolm gave a small smile, the kind that softened the hard lines of his face. "Let's start with the car before we get to the universe." She blinked, the first crack in her armor. Under the fluorescent lights, Malcolm went to work. The hood rose, steam hissing out like breath from a wounded animal. He leaned in, hands steady, movements deliberate. Lena stood a few feet back, phone still in her hand, but for once she wasn't talking. She watched him, how calm he was, how sure. The storm raged outside, but inside the garage, time slowed. "You own this place?" she asked finally. "Built it," Malcolm replied without looking up. "By yourself?" "Mostly. Got some help from an old friend when I started." She nodded, though he couldn't see it. "Must have taken a lot." He paused just long enough to glance her way. "Everything worth something does." She didn't have an answer to that. Minutes passed, only the sound of rain and the soft click of tools. When the engine finally turned over, humming smooth again, Lena's eyes widened. "That's it. That's it," he said. She laughed under her breath. "You make it sound too easy." Malcolm straightened up, wiping his hands again. "Most problems are. People just stop listening before they're fixed." It wasn't just a line. It was who he was, a man who'd learned that the hardest part of repair wasn't the work, but the patience. Lena watched him, curious now instead of impatient. There was something about the way he spoke, slow, measured, that made her want to ask more. "You're not like most people," she said finally. He raised an eyebrow. "That good or bad?" "I'll let you know," she said, smiling for the first time. He chuckled, low and warm. "That's fair." The rain had eased to a drizzle. She slipped her phone into her bag, realizing she hadn't checked it in nearly 20 minutes, a small miracle in itself. "How much do I owe you?" "Come back tomorrow," Malcolm said. "Road's still slick. Just get home safe tonight." She hesitated, and used to people who didn't immediately name a price. "You don't trust me to pay?" "I trust you," he said simply. Just figure you've had enough fixing for one night. That made her pause. There was no flirtation in his voice, no angle. Just kindness, the kind that made her uneasy because she couldn't control it. She studied him again, the grease-stained shirt, the faint silver in his beard, the steadiness in his eyes. He wasn't her type. Or maybe he was exactly what she didn't know she needed. "Thank you," she said, softer this time. He nodded. "Drive safe, Miss?" "Brooks," she answered. "Lena Brooks." "All right, Miss Brooks. See you tomorrow." As she walked toward her car, she glanced back once, through the curtain of light rain. Malcolm had already turned back to his workbench, setting his tools in order, as if nothing unusual had happened. But Lena knew something had. When she got into the car, she caught her reflection in the rearview mirror, hair slightly damp, lipstick fading, eyes softer than usual. She didn't like what she saw, or maybe she liked it too much. On the drive home, the city lights shimmered through the mist. The steady hum of her newly fixed engine sounded almost peaceful. It had been a long time since anything in her life felt that way. She thought about calling someone, her sister, her mother, to tell them about the mechanic who spoke in riddles and refused payment. But she didn't. Some stories don't start with words. They start with wonder. Meanwhile, back in the garage, Malcolm sat in his office, staring at the rain tracing slow patterns down the window. He'd seen thousands of customers come and go, but this one lingered. There was something about her energy that disturbed the calm in him. Not chaos exactly, just a vibration he hadn't felt in years. He reached for his coffee mug, took a slow sip, and whispered under his breath, "Woman like that, she'll either bless your life or break it clean in two." He didn't know which it would be yet. Outside, the storm moved east. The city quieted. And somewhere between the rhythm of the rain and the ticking of the clock, two very different worlds had just collided, one built on motion, the other on meaning. Neither of them could see the road ahead. But both would remember the night the rain refused to stop, and how, for a brief moment, something fragile and human flickered between the noise. The weeks after that night in the rain unfolded like something written by fate, not the loud kind but the quiet kind that whispers instead of shouts. Lena came back to the shop the next morning just as she'd promised. The sun was out this time, slicing through the mist that still clung to the streets. Her car purred when she parked, no longer gasping for breath. Malcolm was wiping down a fender when she stepped in. He looked up, and that same knowing calm met her again. "You made it," he said. "I said I would. Most people don't mean it." "Then I guess I'm not most people." That line, confident, measured, sharp, should have been a warning. But instead it made him smile. She paid him double what he'd asked. He tried to refuse, but she wouldn't hear it. "You fixed more than my car," she said. "You fixed my night." And just like that, something quiet started to bloom. At first, it was small things. Coffee runs after work, moments stolen between her business calls and his long shifts. She'd drop by the shop with a sandwich or a cup of cappuccino, teasing him about being stuck in Greece all day. "You know, most people use computers, not carburetors," she'd say, grinning. "And most people don't know how to fix what they use," he'd reply. They'd laugh. And for the first time in a long time, Lena found herself breathing differently, slower, softer. Malcolm's world was unhurried. There was no pressure to prove, no scoreboard to win. On Sundays they'd walk down the riverside, where the city's noise melted into the sound of water. She'd tell him stories about corporate battles and boardroom games. He'd listen, never interrupting, just nodding at the right moments. In return, he told her about his father, a welder who'd taught him that hands that build are better than mouths that boast. Lena loved that line so much she wrote it on a sticky note and kept it on her desk at work. But the world doesn't like bridges between classes. Not for long. When her friends found out about Malcolm, their smiles grew tight. "Wait, you mean he fixes cars?" one of them said during brunch, her voice dipped in honey but laced with judgment. "Yes," Lena answered simply. "He owns his own shop." The table went quiet for half a beat too long. "That's nice," another added quickly. "Kind of like grounding, right?" Lena laughed it off, but that night she couldn't shake the sting. They didn't mean harm, not exactly. But they made her feel like she was doing something she needed to defend. Malcolm's circle wasn't much better. At his friend JD's barbecue, the teasing started before Lena even arrived. "You telling me the lady drives a Benz and still picked you up?" JD joked. "What's she doing, writing a charity book?" Malcolm shook his head, smiling lightly. "She's just a woman. Same as anyone else." "Nah," another friend chimed in. "Not same. You ever think maybe she's slumming it for excitement? You know, the good man from the block fantasy?" Malcolm didn't answer. He just stared at the coals in the grill, the orange glow reflecting in his eyes. When Lena showed up, wearing jeans, no makeup, hair loose, the laughter died down. She greeted everyone kindly, but he could feel the invisible lines between her and his people. Different worlds. Different languages. Still, when their eyes met across the crowd, none of that mattered. She smiled. He exhaled. That night as they drove home, she said quietly, "You heard them, didn't you?" "I heard," he replied. "You care?" He shook his head. "People talk when they don't understand. I stopped caring about that a long time ago." Lena looked out the window. "I wish I could say the same." He reached over, his rough hand finding hers. "You will." Months passed. The noise around them never stopped, but somehow they grew stronger. He taught her how to change a tire. She taught him how to use a smartphone calendar properly. They learned each other's music, each other's silences. And then came the day he asked her to take a drive. It was spring, one of those golden days when everything feels soft-edged. He drove her to the old bridge outside town, the place where his father used to fish. The water shimmered below, the breeze carrying the scent of rain long gone. Lena leaned on the railing, her laughter echoing in the open air. "You're quiet today," she said. He smiled, his hand slipping into his pocket. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About how life surprises you. How sometimes the thing you never planned for becomes the only thing that makes sense." When she turned toward him, he was already kneeling. No grand gestures, no photographers, no audience. Just a man and his heart. "Lena Brooks," he said softly, "you've got a world I don't belong to. And I've got one you don't need to understand. But if we can meet in the middle, if we can keep building instead of breaking, I want to spend the rest of my life learning your storms and showing you my peace. Will you marry me?" For a heartbeat the world stopped. The wind stilled. Even the river seemed to listen. Lena's eyes filled before she could speak. She nodded, once, twice, and whispered, "Yes." He stood, hands trembling slightly as he slid a modest silver band onto her finger. She laughed through tears. "It's perfect," she said. "It's honest," he replied. That night, lying beside him, she thought about how simple it had been. No diamond, no dinner reservation, no audience. Just truth. And for the first time in her adult life, Lena Brooks, the woman who always had a plan, didn't feel like she was leading. She felt like she was home. But outside their window the city lights blinked like a warning. Because love built between two worlds doesn't erase the distance. It only hides it. For a while. The morning was perfect, too perfect, almost. The sky over Atlanta was washed clean by dawn, the kind of soft blue that made everything feel hopeful. The garden venue shimmered under gold-trimmed canopies and pale flowers. Music floated gently through the air, strings and saxophones weaving into something that felt both elegant and intimate. Malcolm Carter stood at the altar in a charcoal suit, his hands clasped, his breath slow. He'd never been the nervous type, but that day his heart raced in quiet disbelief. Somewhere between the scent of lilies and the murmur of guests, it hit him. He, the mechanic from the South Side, was marrying Lena Brooks, the woman who'd once looked too polished for rain. When she appeared at the end of the aisle, he forgot everything else. Her white dress didn't just shine, it moved like light itself. There was a softness to her that morning, a kind of surrender he'd never seen in her before. The guests rose, the music swelled. And for a brief, breathtaking moment, the world felt like it had been made for them. But perfection has its price. As Lena walked, her mother's eyes never left Malcolm. Her expression was calm, but her grip on the bouquet she held was too tight. Her father, Harold Brooks, a retired judge with a face carved from pride, nodded at Malcolm when their eyes met. It was the kind of nod that said, "I see you. I'll tolerate you. But don't ever forget who's watching." The ceremony moved on smoothly. Vows exchanged. Rings slipped onto fingers. Applause. Cameras flashing. When Malcolm leaned in to kiss his bride, the audience clapped, all smiles and champagne laughter. But in the corners of the crowd, not everyone was smiling. At the reception, Malcolm found himself surrounded by people who looked at him like a question that hadn't been answered. "Malcolm, is it?" an uncle asked, swirling his wine. "I hear you run a shop." "Yes, sir," Malcolm replied, steady. The man smiled, but his eyes didn't. "Must be fulfilling work. I always say it's good to have men like you around. Hard-working, salt-of-the-earth types." Malcolm nodded politely. "Appreciate that." Lena, standing beside him, squeezed his hand under the table. She knew that tone, the one that dressed insult as compliment. She leaned in, smiling sweetly at her uncle. "You're right. It is fulfilling. Not everyone can take something broken and make it run again. The uncle blinked, taken aback. Malcolm almost laughed. That's my woman, he thought. But the whispers didn't stop. At the buffet he caught fragments. She always liked projects. He seems nice, for what he is. I give it a year. And then came the one that stayed. He was passing near the patio when he heard it, Lena's cousin Dana, half-drunk, leaning close to her sister. She could have done better, she said, voice low but not low enough. I mean, he fixes cars, for God's sake. What's she gonna talk to him about? Oil changes. The words landed like a stone in Malcolm's chest. He didn't turn. Didn't flinch. Just kept walking, slow and silent, his face unreadable. But inside something small cracked. Later that night, while the DJ played an old Marvin Gaye song, Lena found him standing alone near the edge of the garden, his jacket off, shirt collar open. There you are, she said, stepping closer. Everyone's looking for you. Needed a minute, he replied. Something wrong? He smiled faintly. Just taking it all in. She studied him, the stillness, the way he stared out into the night. You sure? He turned to her, his gaze softening. I'm sure. You look beautiful, by the way. She smiled, but she knew him too well to believe the simplicity. She reached up, brushed a thumb across his cheek. Don't let them get in your head, she said quietly. He blinked, caught off guard. What do you mean? She hesitated. I saw how my cousin looked at you. I know what people are saying. Malcolm exhaled, a bitter laugh slipping through. You can't hear that many whispers without catching one. Then ignore them. Easier said than done, he murmured. I've been the man people underestimated my whole life. Doesn't bother me much. But tonight, it's different. Why? Because they're underestimating you, he said. They think you made a mistake choosing me. I just don't ever want you to wake up one day and wonder if they were right. She looked at him for a long moment, then reached for his hand. Malcolm, I chose you because you're steady. Because you don't chase noise. You fix things. You fix me. Let them talk, they only see what's on the surface. He smiled, a small, grateful smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. All right, he said softly. All right. She leaned in, kissed him gently, her lips tasting faintly of wine and defiance. The night stretched on. Laughter. Toasts. Dances. At one point, Malcolm's friend JD pulled him aside. You okay, man? Malcolm shrugged. I'm good. JD followed his gaze to the clusters of Lena's relatives. Polished, rehearsed, perfectly groomed. Yeah, I'd be good too, marrying a fine woman like that, he joked. But I see it in your face. You feel like you walked into the wrong movie? Malcolm chuckled quietly. Maybe. But I'm here now. So I'm gonna make it a good one. When the night ended and the last car drove off, Malcolm and Lena stood together under the glowing lanterns. The garden was empty now, the laughter fading into the city night. Lena kicked off her heels, sighing. We did it, she said, almost like a child. He nodded. Yeah, we did. Say it feels right, she whispered. He looked at her, eyes deep and tired but full of love. It feels real, he said. And that's better. They held each other in silence, unaware of how true those words would become, because real wasn't always pretty, and love built under judgment carries its own kind of weather. The wind moved gently through the trees, carrying away the last laughter of the night. And somewhere beneath the beauty and the vows, a seed of doubt began to take root, quiet, invisible, patient. The kind that only grows when no one's looking. The first few years of their marriage were quiet, the kind of quiet that felt earned. Malcolm woke before sunrise most mornings, the faint hum of his alarm blending with the smell of rain on asphalt. He'd slip out of bed gently so as not to wake Lena, tiptoe past the framed wedding photos on the wall, and drive to the shop while the world was still half asleep. The neighborhood kids called him Mr. Fix, because he could bring any dead engine back to life. Lena, meanwhile, was climbing fast, the youngest senior strategist in her firm's history. Her name started appearing on office doors and meeting memos. When she walked into a boardroom, even the men twice her age went quiet. She loved her work, the rush of strategy, the pulse of ambition. But every evening when she came home to the scent of Malcolm's cooking and the sound of old R&B floating from the living room, she remembered why she'd chosen him. Their home was small but alive. Framed photos, shared mugs, laughter echoing down the hallway. On Sunday mornings, she'd sit on the porch with coffee while Malcolm washed his truck, shirt sleeves rolled up, his radio playing Sam Cooke. They didn't need much, they never did. Their love had texture, soft in some places, sturdy in others, built not from luxury but from rhythm. And for a long time it was enough. They hosted barbecues, visited her parents for holidays, sent money to his mother in Savannah. Malcolm built an expansion at his garage, Carter Auto Works, in bold letters across the roof. Lena helped with branding, joking that she'd be his unpaid marketing team. He teased her about her spreadsheets. She teased him about his ancient flip phone. They made it work. But beneath that peace, something small began to stir. Not loud, not obvious, just a slow tightening of expectations. It started with family dinners. Lena's mother never said anything cruel outright. She didn't need to. The silence between her sentences did enough. "You're still in that little house, dear?" she'd ask, slicing her steak with surgical precision. "I just assumed by now you'd have upgraded." Lena would smile, sip her wine and say, "We're comfortable where we are." "Comfort is fine," her mother replied. "But comfort isn't growth." Malcolm would sit quietly, offering to pour more wine or clear the dishes. He'd long stopped trying to impress them. Respect, he'd learned, was something you couldn't earn from people who refused to see your worth. Later that night, when they got home, Lena would sigh as she slipped off her earrings. "I wish they'd stop treating you like a project," she'd whisper. He'd smile faintly. "They just see the world through their own lens. Don't let it get to you." "I try," she'd say, her voice small. And she did try. But with each family visit, the whispers got louder. The tension didn't come from fights, it came from silence. From the way Lena would pause before introducing Malcolm at company events. From the polite smiles that lingered a second too long when her colleagues realized her husband ran a garage. At first she brushed it off. But then came the promotion party, champagne, laughter, congratulations. Her boss, a tall man with silver hair, clinked glasses with her. "You've got the mind of a CEO, Lena," he said, smiling. "And the image to match." His eyes flicked briefly to the photo of her and Malcolm on her phone wallpaper. The smile dimmed. "You ever think about how much further you could go if you leaned into the brand a little more?" She laughed it off, but the comment lingered. The brand. The word felt like a stain. That night, Malcolm waited up for her, dinner cold on the table. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Just tired," she said. He nodded. "You've been saying that a lot lately." She leaned against the counter, rubbing her temples. "I just need a break. The job's been a lot." He studied her quietly, then reached over and turned down the music. "Lena, tell me something. Are you happy?" She froze. "Of course I am." He smiled softly. "Then I'll hold you to that." Months turned into years. The laughter was still there, but now it lived between sighs. The house that once felt like a refuge started feeling too small for her dreams and too quiet for his peace. One night, as rain fell outside, the same kind of rain that had brought her into his life, Lena sat by the window, scrolling through old pictures. Their wedding, their first trip, the garage opening. The smiles were real, but something inside her was shifting. She thought of her mother's words. Of the colleagues who said she was settling. Of the clients who asked, "What does your husband do again?" And for the first time she didn't have a ready defense. Malcolm came up behind her, kissed the top of her head. "You're quiet," he murmured. "Just thinking," she said. "About work." She hesitated. "About everything." He nodded, wrapping his arms around her. "Then think slow. The world moves too fast as it is." She smiled weakly, leaning into him, but her mind was already elsewhere, pacing through the what-ifs and could-have-beens that people had planted in her. And maybe that's how cracks really start, not with anger but with influence. With voices that tell you what you deserve until you start to believe them. The nights grew longer. The conversations shorter. Malcolm still loved her the same way he fixed engines, with patience and consistency, but Lena's heart was learning a different rhythm now, one built on ambition instead of peace. Sometimes she'd watch him sleeping beside her, his hand resting over hers, and wonder if love was supposed to feel like this, steady but still. She'd remind herself that this was the life she'd chosen. But choice doesn't silence longing. And if you've ever been there, standing between peace and the pull of something louder, then you know how hard it is to stay still. Tell me, where are you watching from tonight? Have you ever had to choose between comfort and curiosity, between the life that loves you and the one that challenges you? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to know how many hearts have walked this line. Lena's rise was meteoric. What began as long nights and client calls soon turned into magazine features, keynote speeches, and invitations to events she'd only dreamed of attending. Her name became synonymous with visionary. She was the face of ambition, bold, elegant, unstoppable. Malcolm watched from the sidelines with quiet pride. Every newspaper headline with her face on it made his heart swell. He'd clip the articles, slide them into a folder labeled Lena's Wins, and keep it under the counter in his office. He didn't tell her he did that. He just liked knowing her story lived somewhere in his hands too. But pride and distance often walk together. The more Lena climbed, the more she changed, not all at once but in subtle, almost invisible ways. Her wardrobe shifted from soft colors to sharp lines. Her tone, once playful and warm, began to carry precision, like every word was weighed before being released. At first, Malcolm found it fascinating. "You're different lately," he said one evening as they shared dinner over takeout. "Different how?" "More polished," he said, smiling. "Like you're living in a brighter world." She laughed softly. "That's what success does, it sharpens you." He nodded, but something in her eyes made him uneasy, the kind of unease you can't name, only feel. Soon she started correcting him, gently at first. "Don't say ain't, baby," she'd whisper before a dinner party. "You know how these people can be." He'd grin. "These people? You mean your people?" She'd roll her eyes. "You know what I mean." But he did know. He always knew. At her company's gala, Lena wore a sleek black gown that shimmered under the lights. Malcolm, in his dark suit and worn leather shoes, stood by her side as she introduced him to a circle of executives. "This is my husband," she said, voice light. "He runs a small business, auto repairs actually. Runs a small business." Her tone was dipped in apology, coated with polite embarrassment. The men smiled. "Oh, that's interesting," one of them said. "A hands-on guy." Lena chuckled awkwardly, moving the conversation along. Malcolm stood still, his smile tight but steady. He didn't say much that night, but the sentence echoed long after they got home. He didn't confront her. He just sat in silence, staring at his hands, the same hands that built the shop, held her face, fixed engines and wiped tears. Hands that suddenly felt small. Their worlds began to orbit separately. Lena's mornings started earlier. Phone calls, emails, meetings. Malcolm stayed grounded, grease, engines and the rhythm of his crew's laughter. She came home later each night, smelling of perfume and power, while he waited with dinner and the faint hope she'd sit and eat. When she did, her eyes stayed on her phone. "You've barely touched your food," he said one night. "I'm not hungry. You used to love my cooking." "I still do," she replied without looking up. "Just, no appetite tonight." He nodded, pushing his own plate away. "You okay?" "I'm fine." "Fine," he repeated softly like he was testing the word. "You've said that a lot lately." She sighed. "Malcolm, please. Don't start." "Start what?" "This, the emotional talk. I've had a long day." He leaned back, the weight of her words pressing into the silence between them. "We used to talk after long days. That was before everything got so busy." He smiled faintly. "Before you got so busy." She looked up, sharpness flickering in her eyes. "Is that supposed to mean something?" He shook his head slowly. "No. It means everything's changing, that's all." Weeks later, she invited him to another company dinner, high-rise view, crystal glasses, laughter echoing against the skyline. The kind of night that belonged to her world now. Malcolm stood quietly by the window, gazing at the city lights below. "You should mingle," Lena whispered, slipping beside him. "I'm good here." "Malcolm," she said under her breath, "people notice when you don't talk." He turned to her, his voice calm. "Maybe I'm not trying to be noticed." She exhaled, adjusting his tie. "Just try, okay?" "For me." He nodded. For her, he always tried. Later that night, she found him outside on the balcony, leaning on the rail, staring into the city. "You don't fit in here, do you?" she asked softly. He smiled without turning. "No, Lena. This place doesn't fit around me." The distance became routine. Her laughter came less often. His patience came slower. Their love, once effortless, began to feel like work. At night, when she slept beside him, her phone glowed with messages and reminders. He'd lie awake, studying her face, still beautiful, still the woman he'd fallen in love with, but layered now with something harder, colder. One morning, as he prepared breakfast, she walked in wearing her navy suit, phone pressed to her ear. "Yeah, tell them I'll review it by noon," she said, grabbing her purse. "Breakfast's ready," he said quietly. "I'll grab something at the office," she replied, kissing his cheek distractedly before rushing out the door. The screen door slammed behind her, leaving silence and the faint smell of toast. He stared at the empty chair across from him, the one she used to sit in, barefoot, laughing over coffee. And that was when it hit him. Love wasn't vanishing, it was just being outgrown. Still, he didn't stop believing in her. He still bragged about her to customers, still watched her interviews online, still said "that's my wife" whenever her name was mentioned. But late at night, when the shop lights dimmed and he sat alone under the hum of the ceiling fan, he couldn't help but wonder, was love supposed to cost this much distance? And to everyone watching, maybe you felt this too. When the person you love starts climbing and you're proud, but somehow you start to disappear in the shadow of their rise. Have you ever loved someone who outgrew the world you built together? Let me know in the comments. Your story might help someone who's standing where Malcolm is tonight. At first, it was just small things, sighs that lasted too long, silences that carried judgment. But cracks never start big. They whisper before they break. Lena and Malcolm began to argue more, not loudly but sharply, like two blades scraping. It started with time. She was always rushing, to meetings, to flights, to deadlines. He just wanted a moment, a meal, a conversation that didn't have to compete with her phone. "Lena, can we eat without your emails for once?" he asked one night, setting her plate down. She didn't look up. "I'm finalizing tomorrow's proposal, Malcolm. This is important." "So is this," he said softly, motioning to the table. "So are we." She sighed, setting the phone aside. "You think I don't care about us?" "I think you care about everything but us lately." Her eyes hardened. "That's not fair. Neither is talking to your phone more than your husband." That silence between them, it was new, cold, and loud. Money came next. Lena had started earning triple what Malcolm made. It wasn't the income, it was the attitude that changed. "You don't have to handle the bills anymore," she said one evening casually. "I'll take care of it." Malcolm looked up from his workbench. "Since when do I need taking care of?" She smiled faintly. "It's just practical. You can focus on the shop." He wiped his hands on a rag, his voice quiet but firm. "The shop is focus. The bills are partnership. You handle the high-rise, I handle the ground. That's how we built this." She shook her head, exasperated. "Why must everything be about pride with you?" "Because that's all a man like me has left when everything else feels smaller," he murmured. She froze, unsure whether to comfort him or argue. In the end she did neither. Then came the image. Malcolm noticed how she started dressing differently, not for him but for the world. Her friends became sleeker, her conversations faster. Every gathering felt like a reminder that he didn't fit. "You could dress up a bit," she said one Friday before a charity event. He looked down at his neatly pressed shirt. "What's wrong with this?" "Nothing," she said, smiling thinly. "Just, maybe a little too simple for tonight." He paused, then said, "Lena, if I start pretending to be someone else, what's left of me?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. They didn't speak the rest of the drive. The tension built quietly, like pressure in a sealed jar. Then one day it cracked. It was a doctor's visit, a conversation about something fragile, something they both wanted. They'd been trying for a baby for over a year. Every month ended the same, hope, then disappointment. Malcolm stayed calm, but he could see how the waiting gnawed at her. "Stress can play a major role," the doctor said gently, scanning the charts. "Perhaps taking things slower, less pressure on the body." Lena's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'm fine, doctor. I manage stress well." The doctor hesitated. "Career intensity can have physical effects, Mrs. Carter. You might want to consider rest." Malcolm glanced at her. The flicker in her eyes told him the word rest felt like an insult. Outside, as they reached the car, Lena exploded. "So now it's my fault?" "What?" he said, startled. "The doctor's hinting that I worked too hard, and you agreed with your silence. You think I'm the reason we can't have a child." "Lena, I didn't say that." "You didn't have to. Your eyes said it. You've always blamed my job for everything." He took a breath, steady. "I just want you to slow down, baby. You've been running so fast you can't even feel life anymore." Her voice rose. "You think slowing down pays the bills? You think ambition ruins love? Maybe it's your lack of drive that's the real problem." Malcolm froze. The words hit him like a clean blade, quiet, surgical, devastating. "My lack of drive?" he repeated softly. She instantly regretted it. He could see it in her face, but it was too late. He stepped back, eyes lowering to the pavement. "You know, for someone who climbs so high, you sure forget who helped you reach." "Malcolm, I didn't mean." He raised a hand gently. "Don't. It's okay. You said what you felt." And with that, he turned and walked to the driver's side in silence. That night they didn't eat together. She locked herself in her office, drowning in work. He sat in the garage, staring at the old car they'd fixed together years ago, the same one she'd driven in the day they met. He ran his hand over the hood, dust sticking to his fingers. "Funny," he whispered, "you used to love this place." The garage smelled of oil and memories. He thought about all the times they'd laughed in here, all the dreams they'd built with nothing but faith and hard work. Now it felt like a museum, beautiful but lifeless. The next morning, Lena found him asleep in the chair, grease on his hands, sorrow on his face. She stood there for a long time, torn between guilt and exhaustion. She knelt down, brushing a hand against his cheek. "I didn't mean it," she whispered. He stirred, eyes opening slowly. "Didn't mean which part?" She swallowed. "All of it." He looked at her, eyes soft but tired. "Words don't vanish, Lena. They just echo." She blinked back tears. "I'm just tired, Malcolm." He nodded. "Yeah. So am I." And that was how love began to feel like a cracked mirror. Everything still there but fractured, distorted. You could still see yourself but not whole anymore. At first, Malcolm thought it was just exhaustion. The kind that comes after too many late nights, too many unspoken things sitting between two people who used to tell each other everything. But exhaustion doesn't smile at text messages. It doesn't leave lipstick on wine glasses at midnight. And it doesn't whisper excuses when love starts fading. Lena began staying out later. "Networking," she said. "Client dinners. Board meetings." She said it so smoothly, so casually, that even her lies sounded professional. Malcolm tried to understand. He told himself this was what success looked like: sacrifices, long hours, missed dinners. He wanted to believe it, but the house told a different story. The laughter that used to fill their evenings was gone. The kitchen stayed clean, untouched. The bed, their bed, had started to feel like a stranger's. He lay there some nights, staring at the ceiling fan spinning shadows across the room, listening to the tick of the clock that once counted moments of love, now marking silence. When she came home, it was always the same: a quick shower, a faint "hey," and the soft glow of her phone lighting her face while she scrolled through messages that never included him. One night, around 11:47 p.m., he heard the sound of her heels in the hallway. She smelled of perfume and laughter that didn't belong to this house anymore. "Long night?" he asked quietly from the couch. She froze, startled. "You're still up?" "Couldn't sleep." She set her purse down. "I told you we had a client dinner." He nodded. "I know. You've had a lot of those lately." Her tone sharpened. "That's how I build relationships, Malcolm. It's business." "Yeah," he murmured, "but you stopped building us somewhere along the way." She sighed. "Not this again." He didn't argue. He just looked at her, the kind of look that begged for truth but expected none. "Go to bed," she said softly. "We'll talk tomorrow." But tomorrow never came. The next few weeks blurred together. She left earlier, came home later. Her phone became an extra limb, always buzzing, always face down when he walked in. He noticed her smiles, small and secretive. The kind of smile a woman gives when she feels seen, desired. But not by him. One night, while she showered, her phone vibrated across the nightstand. Malcolm didn't move. Didn't touch it. Didn't need to. Because sometimes the worst pain isn't what you find, it's what you already know. When she came out, wrapped in a towel, humming softly, he looked at her differently. Not with anger, not even disappointment, just a quiet grief. "Lena," he said, voice steady, "you happy?" She froze mid-step. "What kind of question is that?" "An honest one." She hesitated. "I'm trying to be." "Trying?" he asked, his throat tightening. She looked away. "I don't know what you want from me anymore, Malcolm. I just want the truth." She said nothing. The silence stretched between them like a wound. That night, Malcolm couldn't sleep. He turned toward her side of the bed, empty again. He reached for her pillow, pressed it against his chest, and inhaled. It still smelled faintly of her perfume, soft, floral, fading. He remembered how she used to curl against him, tracing patterns on his arm while whispering dreams about their future. Now she curled away, holding secrets instead of him. He whispered to the dark, "When did we stop being us?" The only answer was the hum of the streetlights outside. The following weekend, his friend Darius stopped by the shop. "You look tired, man," Darius said, wiping his hands on a rag. "You okay?" Malcolm forced a smile. "Yeah. Just been quiet at home." Darius nodded knowingly. "Quiet's a dangerous sound, brother." Malcolm chuckled weakly. "Ain't that the truth?" Darius studied him. "You ever think she might be?" Malcolm cut him off. "Don't. I've thought enough." That evening, Malcolm cooked dinner, her favorite, baked salmon with lemon and rosemary. He set the table, lit candles, even played their old playlist. He waited. 8 o'clock. 9. 10. By 11, the candles had melted low. The food sat cold. He turned off the music. When she finally walked in after midnight, she looked surprised. "You cooked?" He nodded. "Thought we could have a meal. Like we used to." She sighed. "Malcolm, I told you I had a late meeting." "I know," he said softly. "That's why I waited." The exhaustion in her eyes told him everything. He nodded again, his voice barely above a whisper. "Don't worry. I won't wait next time." He walked past her, leaving her standing in the doorway, the scent of cold food and fading love filling the air. That night he slept on the couch, not because she asked him to but because the bed no longer felt like his. He stared at the ceiling until dawn, his mind circling one truth he didn't want to face. Sometimes, love doesn't die, it just moves to another phone, another voice, another place where you can't reach it anymore. And maybe you've been there too. You start sleeping alone even when someone's lying right beside you. You start talking but your words bounce off walls instead of hearts. If you've ever watched love fade in slow motion, not with a scream but with silence, tell me in the comments. Someone out there needs to know they're not the only one still staring at an empty bed. It happened on an ordinary night, the kind where nothing seemed destined to change. Malcolm had just finished wiping down the counter after dinner. Lena sat across from him, typing away on her phone, her nails tapping softly like raindrops. He'd grown used to that sound, the sound of distance disguised as busyness. "Don't stay up too late," she said, rising from the table. "Big day tomorrow." He smiled faintly. "Always is." She leaned down, kissed his cheek, a quick, practiced gesture, then disappeared into the bedroom. Malcolm stayed behind, letting the silence stretch. The faint hum of the refrigerator filled the space between him and the life he thought he still had. He moved toward the living room, ready to turn off the lights, when he saw it, her phone lying face up on the armrest of the couch. The screen lit up with a soft glow. One new message. "I miss you already." He'll never know. For a long moment the world stopped moving. The sound of the clock faded. The room itself seemed to shrink around him. Malcolm stared at the words until they blurred. The message stayed there, bright, cruel, undeniable. He didn't touch the phone. Didn't scroll. Didn't need to. Some truths don't require proof, they just land heavy, certain, and final. He sank slowly into the armchair, his breath shallow. He'd seen betrayal before, in friends, in life, in business, but never here. Never in her. Lena. The woman who once stood in his shop with rain dripping from her hair, laughing like sunlight breaking through clouds. The woman who'd said yes with tears in her eyes, promising forever. He'd built that forever with his bare hands. And now it lay cracked on a couch cushion, glowing from a screen that wasn't even locked. He sat there for nearly 20 minutes, unmoving. The room felt colder, heavier. His reflection stared back at him from the darkened window, a man too calm for what he'd just seen. Finally he rose and turned off the lamp. He didn't want her to wake and see his face, not yet. As he walked past the bedroom door he paused. She was asleep, phone still in the living room, her breathing slow, peaceful. He watched her for a moment, not out of anger but disbelief. How could someone look so calm while burning down a life they built together? He whispered to the dark, "You said you'd never lie to me." Then he turned away. The next morning the sun rose like it didn't care what it had seen. Lena was already dressed when he came into the kitchen. Flawless, polished, late as usual. "Morning," she said, smiling faintly. "You're up early." "Yeah," he replied, pouring coffee. "Didn't sleep much." She nodded, distracted, scrolling through her phone. The same phone. "Big day?" he asked. She glanced up. "Always." He studied her face, searching for something, anything that might tell him why. But her expression was unreadable. As she left for work, she leaned in to kiss him. He turned slightly, the kiss landed on his cheekbone instead of his lips. She didn't notice. Or maybe she did. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded too final. That day Malcolm didn't go to the shop. He just sat in his car outside, staring through the windshield, hands gripping the wheel. He thought about all the times she'd said she was networking. All the nights she came home smelling of cologne that wasn't his. All the laughs that weren't shared with him anymore. Every small doubt that he'd buried came back now, clear as daylight. But he didn't rage. Didn't curse. He just watched. Over the next few days he began to notice patterns, small details he'd missed before. She changed her passwords. She kept her phone face down. She started locking the bathroom door while showering. He saw everything. Said nothing. Because that's how Malcolm fought his battles. Not with noise, but with silence sharp enough to draw blood. A week later, while she dressed for another client dinner, he watched from the doorway. "You look nice," he said quietly. She turned a little startled. Thank you. Who's the client tonight? New partners, she replied, eyes flicking toward the mirror. He nodded slowly. You know, I used to think love could survive anything. She frowned, sensing something under his words. What are you talking about? He smiled faintly, shaking his head. Nothing. Drive safe. As she left, he looked down at her half-empty wine glass on the counter. Beside it sat her phone, locked this time. He stared at it, then at the door she'd walked through. And for the first time he didn't feel sad. He felt still. Like the calm before a storm that knew exactly what it was about to destroy. That night he sat on the porch, wind brushing against his face. The stars were faint, the sky heavy. He whispered to himself, she thinks I don't know. And something inside him, something once gentle and forgiving, went quiet. Not broken. Not bitter. Just quiet in a way that meant he'd seen enough. And to everyone watching this, sometimes betrayal doesn't scream. Sometimes it smiles from a phone screen and dares you to pretend you didn't see it. Have you ever had that moment, when proof finally found you but you didn't confront it right away? If you have, drop a comment below. Because silence sometimes isn't weakness. It's a man waiting for the right kind of truth. It started with a name scribbled on a small card. Raymond Ellis, Private Investigations. A name passed quietly by a friend who'd once walked through his own storm. Malcolm hesitated for 3 days before making the call. When he finally did, his voice was low, steady. I'm not looking for trouble, he said. Then what are you looking for? The man asked. The truth. That was enough. The investigator moved with the patience of a shadow. Unseen. Unheard. Unforgiving in detail. Days became weeks. Malcolm carried on with his routine, fixing cars, greeting customers, laughing when he had to, but the silence between each day grew longer. At night, when Lena slept beside him, he'd stare at the ceiling, counting the seconds until morning. Every time her phone buzzed, he flinched, not from fear but from expectation. Then one Friday evening Raymond called. You should come by the office. Malcolm drove there without a word to anyone. The world outside was gray, drizzled with rain, the kind of weather that matched the inside of a man who already knew what he was about to see. When he arrived, Raymond handed him a brown envelope. No words, no build-up. Just truth in paper form. Malcolm opened it slowly. The first photo was harmless. Lena sitting across from a man in a dark suit, in what looked like a restaurant. The next was of them laughing. The third, her hand on his chest. The fourth, them entering a hotel lobby too close. His stomach tightened. Each picture was a knife to the chest, sharp and deliberate. There were timestamps. Dates. Times he remembered perfectly, nights she said she was working late, or meeting a client. Every lie had a picture now. Raymond's voice broke through the silence. I'm sorry, Mr. Brooks. She didn't even try to hide it. The guy's name is Adrian, works in her firm. Malcolm closed the folder gently, like he was tucking a child to bed. He took a deep breath. You did your job. Thank you. And that was it. No shouting. No tears. Just quiet. That night, he sat in his car outside the house for almost an hour before going in. From the window, he could see her moving around the kitchen. Graceful, beautiful, familiar. The woman in the photos and the woman in that kitchen were the same person, yet they felt like strangers. He entered quietly. Hey, you're home late, she said, smiling. Busy day. He nodded. Yeah. You. The usual. He studied her face. The ease. The lie. For the first time he realized she wasn't guilty. She was comfortable. She'd built an entire life between two worlds and learned to live inside the lie. He wanted to ask why. Why the secrecy? Why the distance? Why the need to destroy something that once felt sacred? But he didn't. Not yet. He knew what she'd say, it's not what it looks like. And he didn't want words anymore. He wanted clarity. Over the next few days he became a man of quiet preparation. He created a folder, hidden, encrypted, and stored every file, the photos, the messages, the call logs. He backed them up in multiple places. He wasn't planning revenge. He was preparing for survival. Because when truth finally walks into the room, you don't fight for pride, you fight for peace. Lena began to notice his distance. Is everything okay? She asked one morning. Everything's fine, he said, smiling faintly. Just tired. She touched his arm, a soft, practiced touch that once meant comfort but now felt like pity. You've been quiet lately, she said. Maybe I'm just learning from you, he replied, almost too softly to be heard. She looked at him, confused. He turned away before she could see the truth in his eyes. 2 weeks later, the investigator called again. I think you should see this. He met him at a cafe this time. Raymond slid another envelope across the table. Inside, more photographs. Her hand in another man's hand. Her head on his shoulder. Her laughter under dim restaurant lights. But this time there was something else, a short video clip. Malcolm hesitated before pressing play. Lena's voice came through, low and intimate. He's a good man, just not my world. The man replied, then leave him. She smiled, that same smile Malcolm once thought was only his. Soon. Malcolm stopped the video. For a moment he couldn't breathe. Not because of the betrayal, but because of how calm she sounded. As if loyalty were something she could schedule. He leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. Thank you, Raymond, he said quietly. You've done enough. That night, Malcolm didn't go home right away. He drove to the old pier by the lake, the one he and Lena used to visit when life was simpler. The water reflected the city lights, still and dark. He stood there for a long time, wind brushing against his face, hands deep in his pockets. He wasn't angry anymore. He was finished. Every man reaches a point where heartbreak stops hurting and starts hardening. That was where Malcolm stood, between pain and resolve. When he finally turned back toward his car, his reflection in the windshield looked different. Older, colder, but unbroken. He whispered to himself, I have proof. And soon she'll have silence. The snow fell gently that morning, blanketing the world in white silence. Inside the Brooks family home, laughter echoed, forced, polished, and loud enough to cover the cracks beneath. Christmas lights twinkled across the living room. A tall tree stood near the window, trimmed to perfection, every ornament color-coded like everything else in Lena's life, flawless, cold, and controlled. Malcolm stood near the edge of it all, hands clasped behind him. He wasn't family here. He was a guest, tolerated, not embraced. He'd learned to smile through the small humiliations, the little jabs disguised as jokes. Still running that little garage of yours? Her uncle asked. Still fixing the city one car at a time, Malcolm replied, steady and polite. The laughter that followed wasn't cruel, but it wasn't kind either. Lena floated through the room, flawless in a red dress, smile radiant, voice smooth. She looked every bit the woman she had always wanted to become. Admired, envied, untouchable. But this Christmas she was something else too. Ready. After breakfast, she called everyone's attention. Can I have a moment? She said, her tone warm but rehearsed. Her mother smiled knowingly. Her father folded his arms. Malcolm felt the shift before she even spoke. Lena turned toward him, voice sweet as honey. Malcolm, you've been such a part of my life. And I think it's time we both stop pretending this marriage still means anything. A murmur rippled through the room. What are you doing? Malcolm asked softly. She smiled wider, reaching for a gold envelope from the mantel. Making things official. She handed it to him, divorce papers, crisp, clean, deliberate. Go ahead, she said. It's better this way. You'll be free to fix more cars. And I'll finally be free to live the life I deserve. Her family smirked. Her mother sipped her wine. Someone muttered, about time. But Malcolm didn't move. He didn't shout. Didn't flinch. Instead, he set the envelope gently on the coffee table. Then, in one smooth motion, he reached into his coat and pulled out a second envelope, thicker, heavier, the color of truth. He looked directly at Lena, his voice low but sharp as glass. You're right, Lena. It's time we stop pretending. He handed her the envelope. She frowned, confused. What's this? Evidence, he said simply. So you don't have to lie to anyone, not even yourself. The room froze. Her mother's wine glass paused midair. Her father's smirk faltered. Lena's fingers trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside, photographs. Printed. Clear. Unmistakable. Lena and Adrian in the hotel lobby. Her hand on his chest. The late-night dinners. The time-stamped messages. The video still of her voice saying, he's a good man, just not my world. Gasps filled the room like breaking glass. Lena, her mother whispered. What is this? Her father demanded. Lena's face drained of color. She looked at Malcolm, the calmest man in the room, and suddenly realized what she had underestimated all along. His silence was never weakness. It was preparation. Malcolm took a step closer, his voice steady. I didn't come here to embarrass you. I came here because I wanted you to see the truth before the lawyers do. Merry Christmas, Lena. He turned to her family, the ones who'd laughed at his work, his clothes, his humility. You all thought I wasn't good enough. Maybe you were right. But I was faithful. I was honest. And I loved her even when she stopped loving herself. A hush fell over the room. Even the fireplace crackled softer as if listening. Lena's father tried to speak but no words came. Malcolm slipped his coat back on, his movements slow, deliberate. He looked one last time at Lena, the woman he'd once built a life around. Her eyes glistened with something he hadn't seen in years. Not pride, not anger, but shame. "I'll sign your papers," he said. "But you'll live with those." He nodded toward the evidence still trembling in her hands. And then he walked away. Outside, snowflakes brushed against his face as he stepped into the morning light. For the first time in months he could breathe. The cold air bit his skin but it felt like cleansing. He didn't look back. Behind him, through the frosted window, he could still see the outlines of chaos. Voices raised, faces pale, the illusion shattered. He whispered to himself. Some battles aren't fought with fists or words. Sometimes truth is the only weapon a man needs. He climbed into his truck and started the engine. The radio played an old gospel tune, soft, hopeful. He smiled faintly. Christmas morning had never felt so silent, or so free. Where are you watching from right now? Have you ever seen someone stay calm while the whole world tried to break them? Drop a comment below. Tell us what you would have done if you were Malcolm that Christmas morning. And don't forget, truth doesn't scream. It shows up. The peace after Christmas didn't last long. Storms never end quietly, they echo. By January, word of the divorce leaked. At first, it was whispers in church halls and corporate corridors. Then it became headlines. Executive files for divorce. Sources cite husband's jealous behavior. The tabloids feasted. Lena Brooks, the rising star of the firm, painted herself as the victim of a small man's insecurity. She told her version on talk shows, smiling through carefully rehearsed pain. "He just couldn't handle my success," she said softly. "I wish him well, but love shouldn't feel like control." Her voice trembled just enough to sell the story. The world believed her, at first. Meanwhile, Malcolm stayed quiet. No interviews. No statements. No defense. He went to work. Fixed engines. Helped customers. Smiled when he had to. People looked at him differently now, some with pity, others with doubt. The story made him small in their eyes, like a man who'd lost more than love, like he'd lost face. But Malcolm knew better. He wasn't fighting for opinion. He was waiting for truth's turn to speak. The court hearings began in early March. The air inside the courtroom was cold, sterile, filled with the low hum of whispered gossip. Lena arrived every morning flanked by her attorney and her mother, dressed in tailored power suits that said control. Malcolm came alone, dark suit, no jewelry, no entourage. Just calm. Her lawyer started with venom. They painted him as possessive, emotionally distant, and threatened by her ambition. They showed texts, selective ones, twisted by omission. Every accusation landed like a punch. But Malcolm didn't flinch. He let it play. Because patience, he'd learned, was a louder weapon than rage. Then came his turn. His lawyer, a quiet older man named Harris, stood and placed a single flash drive before the court. "Your Honor," he said, "we have supplementary evidence to present. Unedited. Authenticated." Lena shifted. Her attorney leaned forward, uneasy. The screens came alive. First, photographs. Then text messages. Then the video. Her laughter filled the courtroom, the one from the hotel, her voice saying, "He's a good man, just not my world." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the judge paused, eyes narrowing slightly before turning toward Lena. Her attorney tried to object, out of context, invasion of privacy, but the damage was already done. Context didn't matter when the truth was visible. Lena's mother looked away. Her father rubbed his forehead, unable to meet Malcolm's gaze. For the first time since this war began, Malcolm felt something loosen in his chest, not victory but relief. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't smeared. He'd simply waited. And now the truth was doing what truth always does, restoring balance. The verdict came 3 weeks later. The judge's tone was dry, clinical, but the words cut deep. "This court finds that Mrs. Brooks' actions were deceitful and inflammatory. The claims made against Mr. Carter were unfounded and damaging to his reputation." Lena lost her settlement. Her professional standing took a hit. Her family, once so proud, stopped answering reporters' calls. Malcolm received what he was owed, the home, financial restitution, but none of it mattered. The real victory wasn't on paper. It was in the mirror. He'd faced humiliation, betrayal, and public scrutiny, and never once lowered himself to hate. In the weeks that followed, the media turned. Headlines shifted tone. Mechanic's quiet dignity wins the day. The man who never spoke, until truth did. Reporters came knocking. He refused every interview. Let her have the spotlight, he told Harris. I just want my peace. He didn't need the world to clap for him. He needed silence, the kind that healed, not hid. Lena, meanwhile, disappeared from public life. Her company placed her on leave. Her friends grew scarce. Behind closed doors she called Malcolm, once. You ruined me, she whispered. No, he said softly. You did that yourself. Click. Silence. That night, Malcolm walked through his empty home. The walls echoed with old laughter and long shadows. He touched the table they once ate at, the couch they once dreamed on, the window where she used to watch the rain. All gone now. But strangely he didn't feel empty. He felt clean. For the first time in years, there were no lies in his house. No whispers in his head. Just truth, quiet, patient, beautiful truth. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat by the window as dawn stretched over the horizon. The light touched his face gently as if congratulating him for surviving the storm without becoming one. The war was over. But peace didn't come easy. After the final hearing, Malcolm went home to a house that no longer felt like home. Every corner carried a memory, the smell of her perfume still faint on the couch, the echo of her laughter trapped between the walls. He thought winning would bring relief. Instead, it brought emptiness. Because when love dies, victory feels hollow. He tried filling the silence with noise, music, TV, long hours at the shop, but it never worked. The nights were the worst. That was when her memory came alive, her voice soft in his ear, her hand brushing his shoulder, the sound of her keys dropping on the counter after work. It played like an old film he couldn't stop watching, even though he knew the ending by heart. He'd wake up sweating sometimes, heart racing, half expecting her to still be there, smiling, reaching for him. Then reality would whisper, she's gone. And so he'd sit up, rub his eyes, and stare at the darkness until dawn. One night, unable to sleep, he found himself staring at an old notebook she once bought him for his birthday. Write something, she had said. You've got too much wisdom in you to keep quiet. He'd never used it. But now it called to him. He opened it slowly, touched the first blank page and began to write. Day 1. I'm not writing to her. I'm writing to remember who I am when no one's watching. The words came slow at first, awkward, stiff. Then something broke open. He wrote about the first time he saw her, that afternoon in the rain, how the smell of gasoline mixed with her perfume. He wrote about their laughter, their arguments, the wedding, the whispers. He wrote about the night she handed him the papers. And for the first time it didn't hurt to remember. It hurt not to. Each night became a ritual. He'd close the shop, make a pot of coffee, and write until his hand cramped. Some pages were angry, others soft, some full of questions with no answers. Maybe love isn't supposed to last forever. Maybe it just comes to show us who we are. His handwriting shifted over time, from tense and sharp to loose and steady. Each word pulled a little bit of pain out of him. Writing became his confession booth, his prayer, his therapy. Weeks turned into months. He started sleeping better. Not because the memories were gone, but because they'd finally found a place to live, on paper instead of inside him. Sometimes customers at the shop noticed the change. Malcolm, you look lighter, one of them said. He'd smile faintly. Guess I'm learning how to breathe again. Still, there were moments when loneliness hit without warning, at the sound of a certain song, or when he saw couples laughing in cars he fixed. He didn't resent love, he just didn't trust it yet. He'd walk by the pier some nights, the same one he stood on after discovering her betrayal. But this time he wasn't there to grieve. He was there to let go. He'd stand by the water, notebook in hand, wind brushing against his jacket, and whisper, "Thank you for the lessons." Because some losses he realized were gifts in disguise. Spring came quietly that year. The city smelled of rain and renewal. Malcolm started opening his shop earlier, staying longer, laughing easier. He reconnected with old friends, visited his mother more often, even took a short road trip by himself, something he hadn't done in years. He didn't know what the future held. But for the first time in a long time, the uncertainty didn't scare him. It humbled him. One night, he closed his journal after finishing another entry. The last line read, "I used to think healing was about forgetting. It's not. It's about remembering without bitterness." He smiled, not the forced kind but the kind that comes from surviving something meant to break you. He placed the journal on the shelf beside a small framed photo, not of Lena, but of himself and his father from years ago, standing in front of the first car they fixed together. "Guess I'm fixing again," he whispered, chuckling softly. Just a different engine this time. He turned off the light, opened the window and let the cool night air drift through the room. The house was still quiet, but it was no longer heavy. The silence had changed. It wasn't grief anymore. It was peace. Months passed. Seasons changed. But this time the silence didn't hurt, it healed. Malcolm had learned to live again. He rose early not because he had to, but because dawn now meant something. Each sunrise was proof that pain wasn't permanent, that even broken men could start over. The auto shop had grown. He'd expanded the lot, hired 3 new mechanics, and installed a small glass office up front with his name on the door. Malcolm Reeves, owner and mentor. But it wasn't just about fixing cars anymore. Now every Saturday he opened the doors to young boys from the neighborhood, sons of single mothers, kids who reminded him of who he used to be. They came for car lessons but left with life lessons. He taught them how to hold a wrench and how to hold their word. How to tighten a bolt, and how to tighten their values. The world won't always give you fairness, he'd tell them. But it'll always respect consistency. The boys listened. They looked up to him, not because he was rich but because he was steady. Because he carried peace the way other men carried pride. Malcolm had stopped wearing his wedding ring months ago, but he didn't throw it away. He kept it in a small drawer at home beside the journal that had saved him. Sometimes on quiet nights he'd open that drawer, touch the ring and smile. Not in bitterness, but in gratitude. That chapter had ended, and he was no longer the man who lived inside it. One evening after a long day at the shop, his phone buzzed. A name appeared on the screen, Lena. He stared at it for a long moment, not with anger but with calm detachment. It was like seeing the ghost of someone you once loved, and realizing it no longer haunted you. He opened the message. Hey Malcolm. I saw the news about your mentorship program. I'm proud of you. I've been thinking a lot about everything. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Maybe we could talk sometime? He read it twice. Her words carried the soft ache of nostalgia, the kind that comes too late. Malcolm leaned back in his chair, exhaled slowly and thought about how far he'd come. Once, that message would have broken him. Now, it only reminded him how much he'd healed. He picked up his phone, typed slowly, each word deliberate, final. I've forgiven you. But I've moved on. Then he put the phone down, turned off the light and stepped outside into the cool night air. The city was alive, the sound of cars, laughter from nearby homes, the hum of life moving forward. He stood there breathing it in. Somewhere deep inside, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, peace without explanation. He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't waiting for closure. He was closure. A week later, one of his ments, a boy named Jamal, stayed behind after class. He hesitated before speaking. Mr. Malcolm, my dad left us last year. I still get mad at him. How did you stop being angry at people who hurt you? Malcolm looked at the boy, saw himself reflected in those uncertain eyes. He smiled gently. You don't stop being angry overnight, he said. You just outgrow the version of yourself that needs to stay mad. The boy nodded slowly, letting the words sink in. Malcolm placed a hand on his shoulder. You can't control what they did. But you can control who you become after it. Jamal smiled, a small, brave smile, and Malcolm felt something tighten in his chest. Not pain this time. Pride. That night as he locked the shop, he caught his reflection in the glass door. Same face. Same eyes. But a different man stared back. He was stronger now, not because he never fell but because he rose without asking anyone to notice. He whispered to his reflection, a faint smile playing on his lips. You made it, old man. And for the first time in a long time he believed it. Sometimes healing isn't loud. It doesn't come with applause or grand endings. It happens quietly, in forgiveness, in growth, in peace. If Malcolm's story moved you, drop a love in the comments and tell us what moving on means to you. Because somewhere, another broken soul needs to know that rebirth is possible. Years had passed. The storms had come and gone and all that remained was peace, not the loud, triumphant kind, but the gentle one that lives quietly beneath the skin. Malcolm Carter sat in the back garden of his home, the same house that once echoed with arguments, slammed doors and tears swallowed in silence. Now all he heard was the rustle of leaves, the soft hum of wind through the trees, and the slow rhythm of his own breathing. The soil felt cool between his fingers as he knelt beside the garden bed he'd built himself, a patch of earth that bloomed with tomatoes, sunflowers and quiet memories. It was here that he had learned to live again. Not by forgetting but by remembering differently. Not by erasing pain but by planting something new in its place. He once thought this house would haunt him forever, that every creak in the hallway would remind him of Lena's footsteps, every empty room a reminder of what could have been. But time had worked its slow, steady magic. The laughter of children from the street no longer stung. The smell of perfume on passing strangers no longer sent him spinning. Even her name, once a blade, was now just a word carried by the wind. Malcolm leaned back in his chair, wiping his hands on a worn towel. His hair had grayed at the temples, but his eyes, those steady, soulful eyes, still held that quiet fire. Inside, the house looked different. The walls were painted brighter. The photo frames were new, pictures of his ments, his shop crew, the neighborhood cookouts. There was no bitterness left, only stories. Sometimes he would sit on the porch and talk to the house like an old friend. "You remember the noise?" he'd murmur. "All that shouting, all that pride. Look at us now. We made it through." He'd smile, a small, content smile. He wasn't just living in the house anymore, he was at peace with it. That evening, as the sun melted into gold over the rooftops, a familiar car pulled up in front. Lena stepped out. Malcolm didn't move at first, just watched her from the garden. She looked different, softer. The kind of tired that comes from learning lessons too late. Their eyes met. No anger. No hate. Just two people who had once shared a dream and now stood as strangers bound by memory. Lena approached slowly, unsure if she was welcome. "You kept the house," she said quietly. "It kept me," Malcolm replied. She smiled faintly, tears catching the sunset. "You look happy." "I am." There was a pause, long, heavy, but not uncomfortable. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. For everything." Malcolm studied her face, not searching for deceit but for closure. "I know," he said softly. "And I forgave you. A long time ago." Her lips trembled. "You always were the better person." He shook his head. "No. Just the one who finally learned when to stop fighting." She nodded, tears glistening, then turned and walked away. No dramatic goodbye. No lingering looks. Just quiet understanding. Malcolm watched her car disappear around the corner, then turned back to his garden. He picked up a small watering can and began tending to his sunflowers. Each drop that fell from the can felt symbolic, a baptism of renewal, of rebirth. As dusk deepened, the house stood bathed in twilight, its windows glowing with soft amber light. Malcolm sat once more, the cool evening air brushing against his skin. He closed his eyes and whispered to himself, not in sadness, not in triumph, but in truth. Peace isn't about silence. It's about surviving the noise. And in that moment, the wind seemed to agree. Later that night, as the stars came out, Malcolm lit a small candle on the kitchen counter. Something he did every year on the anniversary of his new life. Not to mourn the past, but to honor it. He opened his journal, the same one that had carried his pain years ago, and wrote a final entry. "I didn't rebuild this house to forget her. I rebuilt it to remember who I became after her." He signed it, closed the book, and placed it neatly beside the candle. Then he smiled, that calm, unshakable smile, and turned off the lights. Life has a way of testing us through storms, but peace isn't found in avoiding the thunder. It's found in the strength to plant again when the storm passes. If Malcolm's story touched something deep inside you, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and share what peace after pain looks like in your own life. Because your story, just like his, might be the light someone else needs tonight.